What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved comeback stories collides with a question no one saw coming? When an interview meant to celebrate triumph suddenly veers into territory no one could have predicted. That's exactly what unfolded when Brendan Fraser appeared on the Clarkson show, leaving the entire studio in stunned silence. Brendan walked onto the set to massive applause audience on their feet, Kelly beaming. The whole room buzzing with the kind of electric energy reserved for true Hollywood redemption arcs. After years away, years defined by struggle and heartbreak, here he was again. Humble smile, shy wave, the same warmth that made everyone fall in love with him decades ago. Kelly opened the interview with heartfelt praise for his Oscar-winning performance, talking about how deeply it moved her. And in true Brendan fashion, he immediately deflected the credit, lifting up the cast, the crew, the director, anyone but himself. Kelly leaned in, saying he had no idea how inspiring his journey had been, calling it a real-life hero's arc. Brendan just chuckled, uncomfortable as always with grand labels, insisting he'd simply kept showing up and doing the work. The audience adored it. Asterisk from there, everything flowed easily. Kelly brought up his earlier films, the action hits, the comedies, the adventures, and Brendan relaxed fully, telling hilarious behind-the-scenes stories that had the crowd roaring with laughter. Kelly praised the heart he brought to roles that could have been nothing more than action guy punches things. And Brendan explained that even when you're fighting mummies or swinging through jungles, there has to be something real underneath. Their chemistry was smooth, natural, and warm daytime television at its finest. But then Kelly's expression shifted. Her tone softened into something more serious. She asked if she could pose a question many people wondered about. His break from Hollywood. The years he disappeared. The rumors. The speculation. Had he ever felt ready to talk about what really happened? Asterisk Brendan's shoulders tightened just slightly, his smile faltering at the edges. He said he'd shared some of it before, that it had been a difficult period defined by personal challenges, health issues, and life piling up all at once. Kelly acknowledged his bravery, then pushed a little harder. She asked if he felt Hollywood had failed him, if the very industry that made him a star simply abandoned him when things got hard. The studio fell silent. Brendan chose his words carefully, saying the industry was complicated, that many factors determine why someone works or doesn't, and that it wasn't as simple as placing blame. But Kelly didn't let it go. She referenced past hints he'd made, experiences that were traumatic, moments that had deeply affected him, and asked whether there should be a broader conversation about how the industry treats vulnerable people. Asterisk. Brendan agreed that such conversations mattered. But there was a new edge to his voice as he said he wasn't sure this was the right moment, or that he was the one to lead that discussion. He'd come to talk about moving forward, about his work. Kelly insisted that healing required acknowledging what held you back. The tension thickened. The audience seemed unsure whether to applaud or simply sit still. Brendan's jaw tightened. And then, with a calm but unmistakably firm tone, he delivered the line that cracked the air like thunder. "Kelly, with all due respect, you don't get to decide what my healing process looks like." Kelly blinked, caught off guard, stunned into silence as the room held its breath. Asterisk. The audience shifted uneasily, sensing the air in the studio change from lively to volatile. This was not how daytime interviews were supposed to go. Kelly tried to regain control, that polished professional smile flickering back into place. But the warmth that once filled the space was gone. Her voice softened as she attempted to recover. She hadn't meant to overstep. She said she simply thought that because Brendan had been open in past interviews, he might want to share more of his journey with viewers who were rooting for him. Brendan took a slow breath, clearly fighting to stay composed. He appreciated that, he said, But there was a difference between choosing to share on his own terms and being pushed to relive painful memories for what felt like entertainment value. The phrase hit like a spark in dry brush. Kelly bristled, her voice rising defensively as she insisted that wasn't what her show was about. It was about real conversations and human connection. Brendan challenged that openly, asking whether she truly believed that, because from where he sat, it felt like she was trying to coax a breakdown out of him, to capture the viral moment of the broken actor cracking on air. The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer scripted charm or gentle banter. Real tension was unfolding before their eyes. Kelly flushed, her producer making frantic gestures off-camera, likely begging for a commercial break, but she held her ground. She had supported Brendan, she argued. She had celebrated him publicly, admired him, championed his comeback. For him to accuse her of exploitation was unfair and insulting. Brendan leaned forward, intensity simmering beneath his measured tone. What was really unfair, he said, was inviting someone onto a show under the guise of celebration, only to ambush them with questions about the darkest and nasty, about the darkest period of their life. It was unfair to behave as though being a public figure meant he owed anyone access to his pain. Kelly shook her head, insisting she wasn't ambushing him at all. These were the same questions he'd been answering in other interviews, on podcasts, in print, even at awards shows. Why was it suddenly off-limits here? Because context mattered, Brendan said, his voice rising with conviction. Because he got to choose when, where, and how much he shared. Just because he had spoken about something before didn't mean he owed the world an unlimited pass to his trauma. Kelly tried to counter, explaining that when people share pieces of themselves publicly, the audience naturally has questions. That was the nature of fame, and he knew that. Brendan agreed, but said there were ways to ask with sensitivity, ways to let someone bow out if they were uncomfortable. She hadn't done that. She had pushed. Silence wrapped around the room like a heavy curtain. Kelly took a visible breath, steadying herself, and finally offered an apology if she had pushed too hard. She was sorry. Maybe they could step back, shift topics, move on to his upcoming projects. But Brendan shook his head. That, he said, was the problem. She wanted to smooth it over, pretend nothing had happened, but something had happened. She had crossed a line, and trying to pivot without acknowledging it was just another way of avoiding responsibility. Kelly's frustration cracked through her composure as she reminded him she had apologized. What more did he want? Brendan told her plainly. He wanted her to understand why it was wrong. You don't get to poke at someone's wounds and then toss out an oops, sorry when they object. Kelly's jaw tightened. She accused him of being unfair, of walking in defensive and spoiling for a fight, even though she had treated him with nothing but respect. Brendan insisted he wasn't attacking her, he was setting a boundary. The topic was off-limits. Kelly fired back that he was making it personal. And in that thick, breathless moment, with every eye in the studio glued to the confrontation unfolding on stage, the interview spiraled into a raw, unfiltered clash neither of them could pull back from. Kelly stared at him in disbelief, her voice tight as she accused him of leveling attacks, calling her exploitative, accusing her of chasing viral moments, questioning her respect for him. Those weren't critiques, she insisted. Those were judgments on her character. Brendan pushed back immediately, saying he was responding to her actions, not inventing anything. She shot back that all she had done was ask a question, a personal one. Yes, but this show was built on personal conversations. They went deeper here. That was the entire point. Brendan countered that going deeper didn't give her the right to override someone's boundaries or decide what another person should be willing to share. The producer was practically waving a flag for a commercial break by now, but neither of them looked away. The audience was frozen, half horrified, half riveted. Kelly insisted she had given him multiple chances to redirect. She had asked if he felt ready. She hadn't demanded anything. He was the one escalating. Brendan, barely holding himself together, told her the problem was she wasn't listening at all. She was too busy defending herself to hear what he was actually trying to say. Kelly insisted she was listening to him attack her for doing her job. Brendan replied with a voice low and dangerous that her job shouldn't be to make a guest uncomfortable, but to create a space where they felt safe, not interrogated. Kelly's eyes flashed as she repeated the word as though it were absurd. She'd asked one question, one topic he'd discussed publicly before. And he was acting like she'd dragged him under a spotlight and demanded a confession. Didn't he hear how dramatic that sounded? Brendan repeated the word with a sharp edge, dramatic, because apparently having feelings about being prodded for trauma was dramatic, and expecting basic human decency on a talk show was dramatic. Kelly pushed back, insisting she had shown him nothing but decency. That she had invited him to celebrate him, to honor his comeback, to give him a platform, and this was how he responded, by attacking her in front of her own audience. But Brendan said she kept claiming this was a celebration when the moment he set a boundary, she turned it into something about her, how unfair he was being to her, how he was attacking her. She was centering herself in a conversation about his boundaries. Kelly threw her hands up, insisting he was attacking her. He had literally accused her of trying to exploit him for viral content. How was that not an attack? Brendan answered calmly that it was an observation based on her behavior. He said he wasn't comfortable. And instead of respecting that, she pushed and then tried to justify it. That was exploitation, putting the show above the guest's well-being. Kelly's voice cracked as she insisted that wasn't what happened. She backed off the moment he said he wasn't comfortable. She apologized. She tried to move on. He was the one refusing to let it go. Brendan told her an apology without understanding was meaningless. She was sorry he got upset, but she still didn't grasp why it was wrong. Silence swallowed the room. Even the front row looked conflicted about whether they should be witnessing this. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. Kelly finally asked if he needed her to say she was wrong. Fine. She was wrong to assume his past openness meant he'd be open here. Wrong to think they had the rapport for that conversation. Wrong to believe he came in good faith. Was that what he wanted? Brendan shook his head. Exhausted, it was passive-aggressive, making it seem like he was the problem for having boundaries. She accused him of being difficult. She'd apologized more than once, tried to move past it, tried to redirect. How many times did she have to say sorry? At what point was enough enough? Brendan told her bluntly that in this case, there was no moving forward. Some lines once crossed couldn't simply be erased with a quick apology and a topic change. Kelly, stunned, asked if he was saying he wanted to end the interview. He said he didn't think the conversation was productive anymore. They clearly weren't on the same page, and that wasn't going to change. Kelly reminded him they were filming with a live audience and a show to finish. He couldn't just walk out. Brendan stood anyway, saying yes, he could. That was the thing about boundaries. He got to enforce them, even if it made look difficult or dramatic or whatever people would say afterward. Kelly's voice softened, almost pleading, as she asked him to take a breath. Reset. Let them cut this out and start fresh. They could talk about whatever he wanted. Just don't walk out. But Brendan was already unclipping his mic, saying he wouldn't sit there and pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. Kelly rose to her feet too, asking if he was really going to walk off in the middle of her show and make her look like the villain. Brendan said he wasn't trying to make her look like anything, he was making a decision for himself. And if that reflected poorly on her, maybe that was something she needed to consider. Audience members were filming despite the rules. Even the producer had stopped trying to interfere, watching the chaos unfold like everyone else. Kelly stared at him with tears gathering anger, humiliation, frustration. Was impossible to tell. She had never had a guest treat her this way, she said. Never. Brendan paused only long enough to tell her that maybe most guests were simply too afraid to set boundaries with someone who held the platform. Asterisk. Brendan finally freed the mic from his shirt, his hands trembling just slightly, and said that maybe the reason most guests didn't push back was because they'd rather swallow their discomfort than risk being labeled difficult or ungrateful. Kelly's voice sharpened instantly as she shot back that most guests understood interviews involved questions personal ones too and handled them with grace instead of turning it into what she called a whole production. Brendan paused, giving her a long, searching look before telling her she really didn't get it, that she truly believed he was the one in the wrong. Kelly didn't hesitate. She said bluntly that he was overreacting, that he'd walked in with a chip on his shoulder, ready to make this moment yet another example of how Hollywood mistreated him, how everyone was out to exploit him. She insisted she was sorry he felt that way, but reminded him she wasn't his punching bag. Brendan replied softly that he never said she was, but pointed out she was proving his point right now, turning herself into the victim, making the entire thing about her. And that was exactly what he'd been trying to explain. He set the microphone gently on the chair and turned toward the side of the stage. Kelly stepped forward as if she might physically stop him, calling after him to wait and begging him to talk like adults. He stopped but didn't turn around, his back to her, to the audience, to the cameras. He said they tried that already, but it hadn't worked because she wouldn't meet him halfway. Her voice cracked with desperation as she insisted she had apologized. She had acknowledged his feelings. She had offered to change direction. What more did he want from her? Brendan turned back slowly, and his face wasn't angry anymore, just exhausted, deeply and painfully so. He said she could have listened, not waited for her turn to defend herself, but actually heard why he was uncomfortable. Kelly insisted she had heard him listing back every point he'd made, but he explained that the problem was in the defensiveness that followed, the justification tucked inside each apology, the implication that because he'd shared something once, he had forfeited the right to privacy forever. And for the first time, Kelly fell quiet. The audience felt that silence like a held breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller. She said she hadn't been trying to undermine anything, she was just trying to explain her perspective. Brendan told her gently that sometimes explaining your perspective sounds like excusing your behavior. And sometimes the right thing is just to say, "I'm sorry." Full stop. No buts, no defense, no justification. Kelly asked in a fragile whisper if that's what he wanted, an apology, without context, without understanding where she was coming from. Brendan said all he wanted was for her to prioritize his feelings over her need to be understood, because that was what boundaries looked like from the other side. It was uncomfortable. It didn't feel fair, and it didn't let you explain yourself back into the clear. You just had to sit with the fact that you'd hurt someone, even if you didn't mean to. The words landed like weight on her chest. Kelly's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she finally whispered, "Okay. I hear you. I'm sorry. No explanations. No justifications. I'm just sorry." Brendan nodded slowly and told her he appreciated that truly, but said he still needed to leave. Kelly's voice cracked as she asked why, if she was apologizing, if she was giving him exactly what he'd asked for. He still felt he had to walk away. Brendan replied that some damage couldn't be undone in 5 minutes, and that staying would force him to perform being fine when he wasn't. He'd spent too many years performing emotions he didn't feel, and he wouldn't do it again. Kelly wiped her eyes and asked if this was really how it ended. with him walking off and everyone thinking she'd attacked Brendan Fraser. Brendan said people would think what they thought. He couldn't control that, and neither could she. But what she could control was her reflection on how these conversations unfolded. Instead of worrying how she looked, maybe she could think about what could be done differently next time. Kelly bristled, her frustration flashing again as she told him not to lecture her on the industry she'd been in it her whole life. Brendan asked if she truly knew how it worked, because from where he stood, she'd internalized the same toxic beliefs that had damaged him, this idea that celebrities owed their pain to the public. That privacy was optional. That discomfort was just part of the job. Kelly pushed back that this wasn't fair, that she wasn't the people who hurt him. Brendan agreed. He never said she was, but explained she was part of a system that allowed that hurt to continue. And until people with platforms pushed back instead of perpetuating it, nothing would change. Kelly shook her head, overwhelmed, asking if she was now responsible for changing all of Hollywood. Brendan answered no, she was only responsible for her own choices, and today she made one that hurt someone. She could either learn from it or turn him into the villain for pointing it out. That was entirely up to her. He turned again and walked toward the exit, for real this time. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent, so an awkward, tentative ripple of clapping rose and died almost immediately. Kelly stood frozen, watching him go, until she called his name one last time. He paused at the curtain. In a trembling voice, she told him she really was sorry, not because of how it looked or what people would say, but because she truly never meant to hurt him. Brendan's expression softened just slightly as he told her he believed her, but intention didn't erase impact. She needed to remember that. And then he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Kelly alone on her stage, surrounded by a stunned audience and cameras that had captured every painful second. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was only seconds before finally turning to the crowd, trying to pull her professional mask back into place even as it cracked around the edges. She forced a small smile and told them they'd be taking a break, but everyone knew they wouldn't really be coming back. Not from this.